that encapsulates the challenges that we're dealing with here today. The enterprise has $3.7 billion backlog of deferred maintenance that has accumulated over decades. And this backlog is now actively threatening both NNSA's mission and the safety of its workers. As this slide puts it so well, quote, infrastructure risks become safety and program risks, close quote. This slide also shows some very real impacts that infrastructure failures are having. Ranking Member Cooper and I have seen much of this firsthand during our oversight visits to these facilities. Just a small list of the challenges that we've seen include tarps hung over sensitive diagnostic equipment to prevent leaking roofs from destroying equipment worth tens of millions of dollars, chunks of concrete falling from ceilings into operational workspaces, tape and plastic sheathing around pipes carrying radioactive fluids, major hydraulic oil leaks, grass growing through floors. As this slide describes, many of these failures result directly in program delays and safety risks. Our witnesses highlight this in their written statements. For example, here in General Klotz's statement, quote, our infrastructure is extensive, complex, and in many critical areas, several decades old. More than half of the NNSA's approximately 6,000 real property assets are over 40 years old, and nearly 30% date back to the Manhattan Project era. Many of the enterprise's critical utility, safety, and support systems are failing at an increasing and unpredictable rate, which poses both programmatic and safety risks, close quote. And here is Mr. Smith, quote, many key facilities at both Pantex and Y-12 were constructed in the 1940s and were intended to operate for as little as 1 decade. Many facilities and their supporting infrastructure have exceeded or far exceeded their expected life, and major systems within the facilities are beginning to fail, close quote. And finally, Dr. McMillan, quote, one of the things that keeps me up at night is the realization that essential capabilities are held at risk by the possibility of such failures. In many cases, our enterprise has a single point of failure, close quote. Of course, these infrastructure challenges directly impact NNSA's readiness to respond to new direction and military requirements. Broader defense readiness challenges have been a focus this year of the HASC, and readiness and responsiveness within the NNSA has been a focus of this subcommittee for years. We must ensure not only that people and tools within the NNSA are ready to respond, but also infrastructure. On the readiness of people and tools front, this committee has continued to advocate the stockpile readiness program mandated by last year's NDAA. On the infrastructure front, we continue to authorize substantial increases to NNSA's infrastructure accounts. But I believe more must be done. We need to be looking to do more, including both tried and true solutions that have worked in the past, as well as new innovative solutions. For instance, the Facilities and Infrastructure Recapitalization Program, or FERP, was a 10-year, $2 billion effort that started in 2002 and was successful in addressing many of the deferred maintenance challenges. But in the end, it accompanied only a portion of the work that ultimately needs to be done. I think we should be looking for a new FERP-like program for the future. We should also recognize the success of recent public-private partnerships in addressing these challenges in innovative ways. The result out at Kansas City in particular is an indicative of what we can do if we work together and use these kinds of creative approaches. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. You represent and lead many of the workers within our nation's nuclear enterprise. We know how hard they work and are grateful to all of you for your service to our country. Our first panel includes Dr. Charlie McMillan, Laboratory Director at Los Alamos National Lab, Mr. John Ricciardelli. How'd I do on that? Second time was okay. President, Honeywell Federal Manufacturing and Technologies, Mr. Morgan Smith, President and CEO, Consolidated Nuclear Security. Following these gentlemen in our second panel of witnesses, we will also have the Honorable Frank Klotz, Administrator of the NNSA, Mr. Jim McConnell, Associate Administrator for Safety, Infrastructure, and Operations, NNSA. My sources tell me that today General Klotz's birthday, so happy birthday to General Klotz. I would sing to him, but that's pretty bad punishment, so I won't do that. Finally, I want to highlight the important work being done by the witnesses from both our panels. Under the leadership and direction of Secretary Moniz and General Klotz, you all have put a halt to the growth of deferred maintenance, and that's to be commended. You recognize that these challenges have a direct impact on your workers' morale, performance, and safety, and I know you are working hard to deliver for all of them. The subcommittee stands by to assist and support you because we recognize how much more needs to be done. I'll now turn it over to my friend and colleague from Tennessee, the ranking member, for any open statement he may have. Roll Tide.
I was hoping you would dispense without any football references, but there at the end, you completely blew it. I, too, would like to welcome the witnesses, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent that my statement be inserted for the record.
Without objection.
I think the chairman has stated it very well, so I will not belabor the point. We need to get adequate maintenance to all these facilities. It's my impression that naval reactors, on the whole, has done a better job than NNSA. I'm not faulting Admiral Klotz because I think he and Secretary Moniz are part of the solution, not part of the problem, but it's going to take many years of sustained effort to solve this problem. I thank the witnesses. Look forward to your testimony.
Thank the gentleman. Also, we're going to be interrupted for votes during this hearing, so what I would ask is that your entire record is going to be submitted for the record. If you just take 3 minutes instead of 5 to summarize so we can try to get both panels done without delaying everybody. But we will, without objection, submit or accept all of your full statements into the record. Also, I want to point out that during your testimony, when you're making your summary, we're going to be putting up slides to kind of complement what you're talking about, slides that y'all have provided about your testimony. So I hope that's, you don't have to feel the need to narrate the slides. It's just something we're going to be doing concurrent with your comments. And with that, we'll go to the first panelist. Mr. Smith, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today about the deferred maintenance challenge facing both the National Nuclear Security Administration and, more importantly, in my case, the plants that I represent, Pantex plant and Y-12. Appreciate the support of the committee and the support of Congress over the years of our sites, and really appreciate the attention you are bringing to this very, very important matter. The quiet but important work that we do at our sites is essential to our nation and our allies. For me, it's a privilege to work alongside the federal and contractor patriots that do this work in support of our important mission. However, our facilities have not been immune from the progress of time and the effects of that time, similar to other infrastructure in the country. Sustaining the facilities while continuing to achieve our mission is a considerable challenge. Attracting and retaining a world-class workforce is also a challenge. The nation ultimately would benefit from a better long-term approach. Between Pantex and Y-12, we have approximately $800 million in deferred maintenance currently in our books. Approximately $175 million of that is associated with critical facilities. At today's level of funding, we'll not be able to make a substantial reduction in that backlog of deferred maintenance. And the pictures that we're seeing are but the tip of the iceberg relative to what we face. One of the pictures you see is a ceiling deterioration that occurred from operations above it. It caused concrete to fall. Obviously, in that situation, it leads to both operational and personnel concerns. We've been able to repair the condition relative to the ceiling itself. However, we remain very limited and restricted in our operation of that equipment above that ceiling. While we will not compromise on safety and security, the backlog and deterioration that we are seeing does require us to deal almost daily with potential disruptions to our mission delivery. However, we do not sit idly by, allowing our obsolescence to occur with our systems. Along with eliminating excess and deteriorating facilities, we're embarking on the largest set of capital construction projects that we've had for both sites in decades. We also use public-private partnerships as we have opportunities, such as recently occurred with the Administrative Support Complex at Pantex. And then finally, we are preserving our currently operating facilities through innovative approaches and new technologies. In conclusion, I believe our overall future approach must continue to, number one, provide for a robust recapitalization program. Number two, pursue aggressive disposition of our excess facilities. And number three, reduce deferred maintenance issues through additional funding approaches. Each are essential to preserve the mission work that occurs at both sites. They're essential to ensure the safety of our workforce, and they're essential to help keep Pantex and Y-12 on track to provide a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent for the nation. Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Dr. McMillan is recognized for 3 minutes.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation. I'm Dr. Charlie McMillan. I'm the director of Los Alamos National Laboratory. We've recently marked the 20th anniversary of the Stockpile Stewardship Program. This program has allowed the National Security Administration's laboratories to certify this nation's nuclear deterrent that's safe, secure, and effective. Our stewardship efforts would not have been possible without the strong support for significant investments in infrastructure from this subcommittee, Congress, and many administrations. Stockpile stewardship required the construction of new supercomputers, new experimental facilities, and these have helped the United States assure our allies and deter our adversaries. However, key elements of today's nuclear weapons infrastructure were designed and constructed during the Cold War. Because it's more difficult today to bring new facilities online, we must continue to operate existing facilities longer than we had anticipated when they were originally built. And we have to do that and ensure that we do not place our workers, the public, or our mission at unacceptable risk. Just last week, I was discussing these issues with my colleagues at Sandia and at Livermore, and we all share the concern that some of our critical facilities are being run to failure. Because infrastructure funding is a finite resource, I believe that upgrades for replacement activities have to be taken with a very sharp focus on the economics. To this end, staff at Los Alamos, working with our NSA partners, have developed a modular strategy for bringing new infrastructure online. We believe that this will help both with the economics as well as with timely delivery when facilities are needed. These types of facilities, together with those associated with things like high-performance computing, our uranium facilities, and experimental facilities, are all facilities that warrant and merit the greatest congressional focus. In your invitation, Mr. Chairman, you ask about things we might do to improve infrastructure. There are 3 things I'd like to highlight for you. First of all, there's a category referred to as general plant projects. These allow us to use relatively small amounts of money focused locally to be able to address issues. I would highlight for you that at Los Alamos today, we have trailers that were put into service 30 years ago. And in some of those trailers, we have problems with ceilings, water damage falling in. We have problems with rodents in them. They need to be replaced. Over the last 10 years, we've been able to cut the number in half. We still have a long way to go. General plant projects let us do this. And I would recommend to you considering to index that money. It was last changed in 2009. Second, third-party financing. You mentioned that in your opening remarks. This is particularly important for my colleagues at Livermore and Sandia. Finally, innovative public-private partnerships. Today at Los Alamos, we're working closely with our NNSA field office to be able to bring some of these projects online. We would like to be able to do that. Thank you for the invitation to speak today.
I think, thank you, Dr. McMillan. We have been called for votes. We have 7 minutes to get across the street, so we're going to suspend the hearing while we go and vote. We should be back in almost exactly 60 minutes. So I apologize for the inconvenience, but they don't ask me when to call us for votes. With that, we will recess briefly. He probably has multiple ones. By the way, did I ever? This call is hearing back to order. Mr. Ricciardelli, I know you've been anxiously anticipating this. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify before you today. I'm John Ricciardelli, and I'm the president of Honeywell's Federal Manufacturing and Technologies, which has a proud history of serving as the prime contractor to the Department of Energy's Kansas City National Security Campus for nearly 70 years. The KCNSC is a 1.5 million square foot multi-mission engineering and manufacturing facility that supports the NNSA's national security mission. Our primary focus is modernization of the nation's nuclear stockpile using the latest technologies to deliver a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear deterrent. It is an exciting and challenging time in the nuclear security enterprise with several life extensions programs being addressed through their development phases simultaneously. Our facility is witnessing growth this year to support these important objectives. And while it's an exciting time at the KCNSC, we've had similar challenges to my colleagues next to me. About 10 years ago, we were faced with increasing pressure on defense budgets and growing deferred maintenance costs at Kansas City's aging facility. Honeywell was challenged to help the federal government continue its mission in the most cost-effective way possible. The aging infrastructure at the Bannister location made installation of modern equipment difficult, expensive, and hazardous to the mission as well as the personnel. Further, significant time and money was being spent on emergency repairs and facility upgrades for the emerging programs. Honeywell implemented a responsive infrastructure strategy to address these challenges. As a result, we now have a newly constructed, state-of-the-art facility that features a flexible manufacturing design and 50% lower energy consumption. And we are also delivering over $150 million of savings to the taxpayers annually. Today, we are more agile in adapting to changing mission requirements. We're better positioned to recruit and retain the next generation of scientists and engineers. Safety hazards have been greatly reduced at the new facility as well, as evidenced by our safety performance, and in fact, we just celebrated 3 million hours without a lost time injury. The new campus utilized a third-party lease agreement for several reasons. The annual lease cost of the new facility was much more economical than the annual maintenance cost of the old building. A private developer was used and was able to build it more efficiently, assemble tax credits and financing, and finally, the campus can be used for other purpose if the government no longer needs it or if the government can buy it at any point for a fair market value. While Honeywell used commercial best practices to deliver on the responsive infrastructure strategy, I'd also like to elaborate on the importance of contractor oversight reform and how that has played an important role in the successful operation. Today, Honeywell and NNSA created the Kansas City Governance Model, a revolutionary reform of government oversight that reorients how Americans see performance in the government. The shift overall reduces costs without sacrificing public trust, utilizes a simpler governance model that capitalizes on private sector enterprise. To apply this model at other sites, the NSA's operating partners must do what Honeywell does daily, focus on getting results in a sustainable way while eliminating cost. We are committed to assisting the transformation through ongoing collaboration and best practice sharing with our NNSA site partners. However, our work is not done yet. NNSA continues its effort to ensure that the old Bannister property be redeveloped in an efficient, safe, and environmentally responsible manner and not be left as a blight on the community. By funding the transfer of the Bannister facility in fiscal year 2017, the government will eliminate most of the future environmental liabilities through third-party demolition and remediation and could save approximately $650 million. So once again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to address this committee. We are all connected through a shared goal of keeping our great nation safe and secure.
Thank you, and I thank all the witnesses for that, for their opening statements. I know it takes a lot of time to prepare for this, and I appreciate that. I'll start off by recognizing myself for questions. You all heard my opening statement and some of the things that the infrastructure challenges that I described throughout your facilities. And Ranking Member Cooper and I, as you know, have visited several of these facilities and seen some pretty shocking examples of the problems that you face in these very highly secure facilities. But I'd like for each of you, if you could, to take a moment and describe for me in detail some of the infrastructure failures that you've seen and the consequences they have for your facility. Start with you, Mr. Smith.
One of the pictures that you had up that I had noted in my opening remarks was the ceiling failure that occurred as a result of cathine leakage from cathabars above, which the net impact of that is the cathine eats away the reinforcing bars, which greatly weakens the floor. At this point, we can only allow 2 people into that area where you have tons and tons of equipment at a time to do any work, and it's just a systematic failure. But when that equipment goes down, we have no ability then to go process the materials in that particular facility, because that facility requires a very, very dry environment to safely and appropriately process the materials. So that's one example. Another example, on the same site, I was at work not more than about a month ago on a Sunday morning, and I had just left to go to church with the intent to come back when I received a page that one of my utility workers doing a rather routine task over a pit. And this pit was basically grading over top of it with end supports on each end and a center beam in the middle. And as she was doing that work, the structural steel holding up the grading on one end failed. And as you can imagine, you're on the wrong end of the seesaw at that point and you go down. In that case, fortunately, she sustained only a very minor injury, which I think was a grace of God moment in that case. But a very real facility issue with a person just doing a routine job. I had another one of those a couple months before that where a forklift drove on to what looked to be a pad. It was actually an extension of a basement. The structural steel in that area, due to environmental attack over the years, salt and so forth that you use for the weather conditions, had led to that structural steel failing to the point where we had a collapse and a buckling of the concrete, or a depression in the concrete and a failure of the structure, but not something that led to an injury as well. At Pantex, we deal with fire lead-ins to our bays and cells. We are on a major replacement program that'll take another 10 years. But when they fail, and they fail without warning, you can lose bays or cells. We recently had one where we lost a number of bays and cells and the ability to use it until we can go in and do the repair. And that just leads to an inherent unreliable condition and set of services. And I could probably go on, but that's probably sufficient to give others time to comment.
Dr. McMillan.
Mr. Chairman, let me just give you an example from last weekend. We had the air conditioning system in one of our vaults for one of our classified computers fail. And when that went down, it took down the computing equipment that's needed to support our experimental work. That's a recent example. Let me say a few things about things we're acting on, but they illustrate the problem. Both we and our colleagues at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory are replacing major parts of our electrical infrastructure. Same kind of problem. If we have electrical failures, our computers go down, the work that we do to support the stockpile we can't do. Our accelerators go down if we don't have power. Third area, again, that we're taking action on, but it's overdue. the steam plant for the laboratory is finally on the verge of replacement. Good public-private partnership on that one. But if we lose our heating systems in the wintertime, it's cold in Los Alamos. And sensitive scientific equipment does not do well when it freezes, nor do our buildings. And so those are the kinds of things that they're very fundamental infrastructure issues. They don't have high profile, but if we don't take care of those kinds of really basic things, we're not going to be able to serve the mission. Okay. And it affects, as my colleague said, not only the mission, but also the safety of the people. I would offer as a final comment, when I talk to my craft people, the folks who have their hands on things like our electrical and our plumbing systems, one of the problems that they're dealing with day in and day out is how old these systems are. So if they were working on a modern strip mall, things would be uniform. When they go into one of my switch gears, they're dealing with stuff that was built in 1960. Yeah. And they have to figure out how to make it work. And not only is that a maintenance problem, it's a safety problem. Thank you.
Mr. Ricciardelli.
And we're lucky because in the new facility, obviously, we don't have the same issues as my colleagues. But as you saw from the pictures, you know, the Bannister facility, which we're still maintaining even to this day, has about 45 people there that are just maintaining the HVAC system, the electrical systems, you know, all of the infrastructure that still has to be kept up. And you can imagine, you know, back, you know, many years ago with that kind of aging system with, you know, 6,000 people, you know, working that facility, how hazardous it was at that point. So with the new facility, we've actually got 10% of our lease goes into maintaining the facility, and that will ensure that deferred maintenance will never be a problem. But again, once we get the funding, we can get rid of the Bannister and take care of a lot of that issue that we're still dealing with even to this day.
Okay. You all heard me make reference to the fact that there's, across the NNSA, $3.7 billion in deferred maintenance. Let me ask this question. At the pace that you've been addressing deferred maintenance, and this would be really for Mr. Smith and Dr. McMillan, at the pace you've been addressing deferred maintenance over the last 5 years, when will you ever, or will you ever be able to catch up and have completed the deferred maintenance obligations that you have before you, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, we have had success in reducing it over time. I believe that there's several points that need to be taken into consideration when you answer that question. One is we have to continue to retire the old facilities and tear them down. That's one of the ways that we reduce the deferred maintenance. The next is continue to find innovative ways to do it, use tools like Builder. But in the end, I would say absent additional funding, and given the trajectory we're on, we will never reduce it to zero as you would envision it, because some of these systems just have to be replaced in the end.
Dr. McMillan?
Mr. Chairman, as I look at the list that we have at Los Alamos, there are a couple of things I would note. One, we have been working very closely with the NNSA to better estimate what the numbers are, and I think within a year or so, we'll be in a better position to give you updated numbers. And I look forward to what Frank Klotz has to say on that, because I know he's very aware of the work we're doing. As I look at the list at Los Alamos, there are several big items that when we're able to actually take them off the list, as my colleague said, they will make substantial reductions. A good example of that is the chemistry and material research facility. When we're finally able to retire that system and then take the building completely down, that will take down a big chunk. Similarly, I mentioned earlier our steam plant. Another big chunk when we can get that done. And for most of the work that we have plans in place, and we're off working on those plans. My estimate is that it's roughly a decade of work to work that off. Assuming, of course, we continue to get stable funding and we're able to spend it. So it's on the order of a decade.
At the clip that you've been addressing these issues, you think in a decade you will have addressed all the issues that are on your current list. What about the issues that are arising over the next decade?
That depends, again, on funding, Mr.
Well,
Chairman.
that's the whole point. My
This is
argument
not-
is this: you are never going to resolve these deferred maintenance issues at the pace we've been addressing them. That's how we got this $3.7 billion backlog.
And-
it's not going to happen. You're being overly optimistic if you think that we're going to be able to address this. I understand it's your job to be optimistic. It's my job to be realistic, and I'm very frustrated that, and this is the Congress's fault, not yours, that the Congress has not more aggressively tried to get ahead of this maintenance issues.
Well, and if I could look backwards, something that has helped over the last decade was the Facility and Infrastructure Recapitalization Program, what's called FERP, and you mentioned that in your opening remarks. The big deal with that was that it put new dollars on the table.
Right.
It was new dollars coming into the laboratories and across the whole system. And as those dollars came in, we were able to prioritize them. We worked with it at a national level to do those priorities, and that made a difference. When the FERP dollars went up, the deferred maintenance came down.
Right.
So
Those are gone.
Yeah, they're gone, but there is no magic in this. It's dollars.
I completely agree. With that, I yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, did I hear in your testimony the word caffeine when you talked about the collapsed roof?
Yes, sir.
So caffeine from above dripped down and weakened the structural steel and the concrete?
Yes, sir.
Whence did this caffeine come?
It comes out of the cathobar system. It's a dehumidification system that is used to treat and control the atmosphere in that particular facility. And over the years, leakage occurred, various conditions set that up. This goes back quite a period of time ago.
So this isn't caffeine like coffee?
No, sir. It is a specific fluid used for purposes of dehumidification.
Presumably massive amounts of caffeine.
Yes, they're big units, and
Was this leak of industrial caffeine not detected?
I honestly could not tell you exactly what happened years and years ago when it occurred. I really don't have that history. I just know the consequence of what happened.
Second type of question, and maybe for Mr. Ricciardelli more than for anyone else, you mentioned in the lease agreement 10% set aside for future maintenance. I'm almost wondering if it's budgeting malpractice in Congress if for any new project we do not set aside funding for future maintenance, because everything has to be maintained. And if we have funding for capital projects without that future maintenance, then we are blinding ourselves to the obvious.
It's one of the benefits of the private-public agreements that we have in there. Not only did we reduce the cost of operation from $120 million a year down to $60 million a year, we got rid of $238 million worth of deferred maintenance that was left at the Bannister plant. And in fact, all of the maintenance is now done by the developer, and they set aside 10% of our lease payment to make sure that over the 20 years that they continue to maintain the facility at the current day conditions.
I know that's specific to your lease agreement, but in any budget, you could set aside money. And I think sometimes it's called a sinking fund or amortization. There are various ways of describing it. But when we just appropriate money for a project and think that's it, we're generally leery of cost overruns in construction of the project. But we've given little thought to the maintenance needs that are likely to happen, in fact, inevitably going to happen in the future. Right now, we're repairing the Capitol Dome for the third or fourth time in American history, and we'll probably need to do that again in the next 30 or 40 years. It's just one of those inevitable things.
And I think if you use, good project management planning, the move from the old facility to the new facility will demonstrate that you could actually do it under schedule, or ahead of schedule and under cost. We did it for about $18 million less than we thought we would spend. And again, that can be used for some of that deferment of, or for that maintenance in the future as well.
Mr. Smith and I were just in Oak Ridge for the uranium processing facility, one of the early steps there, a $6 billion facility. So have we set aside money for the maintenance of that?
At this point, I am unaware that we have, sir. but I need to take that as a takeaway and go do some reflection on that.
Might be a good idea, at least for your successors.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Don't you find it interesting that in the public-private partnerships, we require them to set aside money for deferred maintenance, but yet we don't do it in our own budgeted project items? You're right, it is Malcolm.
Hello.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Gary Minnie, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm trying to catch up. My apologies for not being here earlier today and missing some of the opening statements, so I'll try to play catch-up here. It appears as though we're looking at specific facilities on these campuses. And I'm curious what the overall program is for the totality of the campus. I noticed that there are certain buildings that have been replaced, the Kansas City facility, for example, some public-private partnerships at Y12, all of which seem to work good. I'm familiar with some of the things that have gone on at Livermore. Do we have an overall plan on what needs to be done in the various facilities? The chemistry building at Los Alamos, obviously in play here, but there's also the plutonium facility and the like. Yes, we know there's a problem. We can look at pictures as well as anybody else. But what is the overall program? Let's just take Los Alamos, since you happen to be here, Dr. McMillan, and share with me and the rest of us what needs to be done and the various facilities, and then the associated cost.
So yes, we have a 10-year site plan that we look across all of the facilities on the site, not just individual ones, as you've rightly recognized, Congressman. Let me talk a little bit about some of the things that emerge from that plan that I think can help address your question. As I mentioned in my testimony, we're hiring approximately a third of our 10,000-person workforce over the next 5 years. A consequence of that is that we need space for uncleared employees first, and then as they get their clearances, which is a time-consuming process right now, we need space to be able to convert that space into cleared space so that they can do classified work in that space. So in our 5-year site plan, we've taken that kind of progression into account to ensure that we'll be able to have the people that the nation needs, and that as they're cleared, they have spaces to work in. As we look at our oldest facilities, we're using our overhead money to retire some of the oldest facilities, and then what we're often doing is taking shells, so the concrete is still in pretty good shape for many of our buildings, and then we're putting in new air conditioning systems, new plumbing systems, new air handling systems for being able to do light lab space. So we're trying to do things as efficiently as we can to provide the space for our workers. But we have a 10-year site plan, and then we work down that plan.
I assume you've made that information available to this committee?
We've made it available to NNSA. We can certainly make it available to the committee if you'd like to see it, yes.
Yeah, I for one would like to see the overall plan that you have. Sure. You did raise an interesting question. I assume there's a very good answer to it. And that is actually you seem to be having to double the space as new people come in and then clearance?
No.
I misunderstand you?
No, we aren't doubling the space. We need space that's initially available for people without clearances.
So that's separate from the
cleared space, but that we can then convert into cleared space so that we'll be able to have them. We're not doubling the space, absolutely not. We can't afford to.
That caught my attention. So
yeah, no, we can't afford to.
you recycle it and use it
Absolutely.
as secured space later.
You know, then we can convert it into secured space. Because no, we can't afford to double space. There's no way.
That's, I'm sure, true. You know that I've got problems with the size of the plutonium facility. And that's another question. I know there's some question about whether it really needs to be rebuilt or not, whether you can repurpose it as you just described with those other facilities that have good concrete. And so I'd like to see more detail about that. The other question, and this goes to Mr. Ricciardelli, you talked about the reduction in operating cost. Could you describe why that happened?
Well, so our operating costs in an old facility at Bannister, just keeping ahead of, operations was about $120 million a year. Through the private-public relationship with the developer, we basically built a $653 million facility, and we agreed to a lease rate of $60 million a year for 20 years.
And they're responsible for the maintenance and upkeep during that 20-year period?
They're responsible for all of the maintenance. The only thing that we maintain in the building is the capital equipment, but all of the facilities, all the infrastructure, the parking lots, the landscaping, everything is done by the developer.
There's another question. I got 10 seconds. No, I have no seconds. I yield back. Thank you.
I want to follow up with Mr. Ricciardelli and Mr. Smith. At both your sites, you've had successful public-private partnerships to deal with some of your infrastructure challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about why those were successful, and just describe, what else you think we could use that model to address? Start with you, Mr. Smith.
I believe they've been successful because it is an opportunity to essentially gain access to a significantly sized facility that enables us to house our workers and accomplish mission in space that, again, will be maintained through that lease arrangement. So it does not deplete your resources on the site. It enables you to get out of much older facilities that have legacy deferred maintenance issues on it. And thus far, we have been able to find developers who are very interested in doing it. They like working with our sites, and they give us very favorable rates for those leases.
Is there another infrastructure challenge that you faced that you think that would be a good model for us to use to address it?
There's a number of areas that we need to look at. One of the alternatives being looked at for a new lithium facility would be a public-private partnership that would impact Y-12. You need to find facilities that you could repurpose as the leaseor someday to other use. Engineering development could be an aspect of that. Warehousing can be an aspect of that. There may be a number of things. It somewhat depends on where you need to be relative to the security fence as well.
Okay, Mr. Ricciardelli.
Yes, sir. I think, the private developer has the ability to bring in the funds that the government doesn't have access to. So in our case, they went through private bond financing, they got local tax incentives from the municipal areas as well. And they were able to get money to fund these programs, and again, over 20 years, it will be a profitable program for them, and they were willing to invest in that. I think in order to replicate it, to your point, we're going to probably have to look at some of the rules that limits the amount of private building on public lands, because in order to recapitalize it, in our case, it's on public land, private land, and they can take it over if we decide to vacate it and turn it into an engineering or a manufacturing source. So I think in order to replicate it at some of the sites that are owned by the government, we may have to look at some of the rules that limit the ability to bring in private developers.
Okay. Lastly, Dr. McMillan, I know you've talked about not today, but previously, your challenges in replacing your workforce, and it's been a monumental effort as baby boomers start to retire. Talk a little bit about the impact of these infrastructure challenges on the people you're trying to recruit into your workforce and the kind of people you're having to compete with, briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my oral testimony, we are hiring approximately a third of the laboratory.
Which is how many people?
It'll be about 3,000 people. The total laboratory today, there are about 10,000 people at work today. And we are having to put many of those people into what is unquestionably substandard space. I mentioned problems with ceilings. We've had ceilings fall in some of our trailers. Fortunately, no safety problems. We take care of that, but
what kind of candidates are we talking about?
We're talking about PhDs, Mr. Chairman.
PhDs,
master's students. These are
engineering.
People in physics, engineering, chemistry, hard science.
What's the reaction you get when you bring those people in and show them where they'll be working?
I've had some of them to my house for dinner, and they're appalled.
Yeah.
You know, when their comparison is what's happening in Silicon Valley, we aren't even in the same league. Yeah. Now, maybe we shouldn't be in the same league with Silicon Valley, but at least it ought to be a safe and, let me say it this way, we are hiring the next generation of the stewards of the stockpile today. That's what we're doing. We need space that's worthy of their service to the country.
Well, and we need them to be able to come to work for us. You know, that's my concern, is that if you bring in these people that have a lot of options, they're well-educated in very high-demand careers, I think it demonstrates we don't value their work if we're going to put them in a building that's got grass growing through the cement floor.
That's right.
And that's,
It needs to be worthy of their service to the country.
yeah. With that, I yield to the ranking member for any additional questions he may have.
I have no more questions.
Gentleman from California.
Once we get those documents about your overall plan and the other laboratories,
Okay, with that, I will tell the panelists we thank you for your testimony and your presence here today, and we will adjourn this panel and bring in the second panel. Thank you. Ignore him. Ignore him. All right, we will call the second panel to order and recognize our witnesses, General Frank Klotz, Administrator, NNSA. Happy birthday. And Mr. Jim Cannell, Associate Administrator for Safety, Infrastructure, and Operation, NNSA. And I understand that only General Klotz has a opening statement for the record, so you are recognized to summarize your statement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope because it is my birthday, you'll indulge me. I take great pride in starting on time and ending on time, but I may take an extra minute or two in the opening statement. Thank you, sir. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the challenges and the steps taken by the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration to address deferred maintenance and the risks associated with aging infrastructure. I'm pleased today to be joined, as you said, by Jim McConnell, who's NNSA's Associate Administrator for Safety, Infrastructure, and Operations, a new position, by the way, that we've created in the past 2 years specifically to focus like a laser beam on these issues. Let me emphasize at the outset that the success of the nation's nuclear security enterprise and its workforce depends upon safe, reliable, and modern infrastructure at our laboratories and at our production plants. Although the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy is widely understood and enjoys broad bipartisan support, the link between nuclear deterrence and the infrastructure that supports it is less well appreciated. While much has been accomplished over the past 2 decades to construct the new experimental facilities and high-performance computing capabilities required to certify annually the nuclear weapons stockpile without nuclear explosive testing, investment in infrastructure has generally not kept pace with the growing need to replace Cold War-era facilities. I can think of no greater risk to NNSA's multiple and vital missions than the current state of our aging infrastructure. We are long overdue to build a modern, safe complex that will meet military requirements, keep the deterrent safe, secure, and effective, and enhance worker and public safety. At the end of fiscal year 2015, as you've already pointed out, Mr. Chairman, the backlog of deferred maintenance at NNSA sites totaled approximately $3.7 billion. As one of his major management initiatives, Secretary of Energy Moniz directed that the infrastructure investment across all of the Department of Energy, including the NNSA, be requested at levels sufficient to halt the growth of deferred maintenance starting in fiscal year 2016. Accordingly, NNSA's FY 2016 budget request, subsequently supported by this Congress, will halt the growth of deferred maintenance in the current fiscal year. And NNSA's FY 2017 budget request, plus this committee's mark, if similarly supported by the full Congress, will actually begin to decrease the backlog in NNSA's deferred maintenance in the coming fiscal year. I'd like to highlight a few of the steps NNSA is currently taking to reduce deferred maintenance. Now, these are described in greater detail in our written statement. But in sum, first, we're increasing funds for recapitalization and maintenance efforts. Second, we're also deploying innovative, best-in-government project management tools to make risk-informed investment decisions to reduce deferred maintenance. Third, we are prioritizing recapitalization projects with deferred maintenance reduction as a key criterion. Fourth, we're increasing buying power by expanding efforts to strategically procure common building systems across the enterprise, such as roofs and HVAC systems. Fifth, in close consultation with this subcommittee, we're completing a site condition review of the physical security systems at all NNSA facilities to develop a security refresh strategy over a 10-year period. And six, we continue to make progress in disposing of excess facilities. On that front, the administration's FY 2017 budget request includes $200 million to dispose of the 3 million square foot Bannister Federal Complex in Kansas City that you've already discussed in the previous panel. The plan for this project, which involves transferring the property to a private redeveloper, will save the taxpayer as much as $500 million when compared to the government's cost to complete the decommissioning if we were to do it directly. Congress has supported this effort, and it's vitally important that the full funding be available in early 2017 to execute this project as planned. Finally, NNSA is recapitalizing its infrastructure using traditional line-item capital construction projects, as well as a number of innovative approaches. You've already heard about one of those, again, the Kansas City National Security Campus, which we dedicated in 2014. This magnificent facility allowed us to move out of the antiquated Bannister Federal Complex, cut our footprint in Kansas City in half from 3 million square feet to 1.5 million square feet, enhance the productivity and morale of our workforce, and reduce operating and maintenance costs, as you heard, by $100 million per year. Significantly, the new facility was constructed by a private developer using third-party financing and made available to the NNSA through a GSA lease. And just last month, NNSA broke ground on the administrative support complex at Pantex, which also uses an alternative financing approach. This project will allow roughly 1,000 employees to move out of 1950s-era buildings into a modern, energy-efficient workspace. It will also eliminate approximately $20 million in deferred maintenance at Pantex. We strongly believe the greater use of such approaches to recapitalizing our aging infrastructure should continue to be explored. Although we've made important progress in tackling deferred maintenance and recapitalizing our infrastructure at all of our sites, a great deal of work, in my opinion, still remains to be done. The strategy, the plans, the processes, and many of the tools for arresting the growth of deferred maintenance, disposing of unneeded facilities, and improving infrastructure management are in place. At the end of the day, however, it ultimately comes down to the level of resources made available, and I would submit now is the time to invest in them and for the years to come. Well, with that, I look forward to answering any questions you and the subcommittee may have.
Thank you for that. I think that we can't help but take note of what you made. You said a lot of important things, but one particular statement, and that is that there is no greater risk to our nuclear enterprise than this deferred maintenance. That is to ignore that, I think, would constitute congressional malfeasance. And I appreciate your candor in making that statement. One question I asked the panelists before you was, at the pace that we have been taking deferred maintenance dollars and putting them against this challenge, do you believe that we will ever be able to get ahead of the maintenance issues that face the NNSA?
Let me be perfectly honest about this. I spent a number of years, as you know, in the military. And every year you operate under a set, relatively constrained budget. That budget may go up a few percentage points as a result of inflation or new missions, but for the most part, it's a fairly stable amount of funding that you get unless you're in a crisis or some other emergency. Right now, the NNSA has a lot of very, very important missions, whether it's life extension programs, stockpile stewardship, our programs to reduce nuclear dangers around the world, naval reactors. So within that particular set of missions that we have to do, there's not a lot of additional funding to spend on deferred maintenance. The experience I had in the military was the first dollar always goes to the mission, to the pointy end of the spear. The next dollar goes to the people who have to employ that spear. And then, if there's money left over, then it goes into infrastructure and deferred maintenance. And every year, commanders would make the decision, you know, I have to pay for mission, I have to pay for people, I will take risk this year on deferred maintenance or recapitalization and hope that I get additional money next year. And then 1 year becomes 2 years, becomes 5 years, becomes 10 years. So I think absent, you know, some dedicated resources for, you know, dealing with the deferred maintenance process, we're going to be able to do some of the things that we've done under Secretary Moniz's leadership to sort of halt the growth, but to really turn it around and make a huge dent in it, it's going to require investment over a long period of time, specifically devoted to this.
So at the pace we've been meeting that challenge, will we ever accomplish it without additional money?
In my opinion, sir, no.
Okay. General Klotz, we've discussed the topic of this hearing many times in the past, and I want to thank you and Secretary Moniz for your engagement and personal leadership on this issue. I think we're getting traction now, but we both know we need a lot more to do. To that end, how can we all ensure that regardless of who the next president is, the attention, focus, and funding needed for NNSA's infrastructure and deferred maintenance challenges continue into the next administration?
Well, thank you. That's, I think, an extraordinarily important question. I think there's a general consensus within the Department of Energy, including the professional civil service, who will continue to work through any transition in NNSA. And as you heard from our M&O partners at the laboratories and the production plants, as well as in Congress and in this committee, that NNSA's infrastructure presents a risk to our strategic deterrent and has to be addressed with some urgency and with resources and with focus. Now, as I mentioned in introducing or alluding to the fact that Jim McConnell was also here, we created a position within, or an organization within NNSA specifically to deal with that. We call it the Office of Safety, Infrastructure, and Operations back in January 2015 to make sure that we had the focus on this issue. We have also, and Jim can talk about this in greater detail, set up you know, a number of processes and tools within the NNSA to help us understand, analyze, and keep focus on this. And then at the broader DOE level, under Secretary Moniz's leadership, we've established key groups, again, predominantly senior career service professionals to sustain the efforts, such as the Laboratory Operations Board, the Infrastructure Executive Committee, and others. And Jim, by the way, who is a career senior executive in the civil service, is a member of all of those groups. So I think we've put in place the the foundation to continue that work as we transition to a new administration and a new Congress. And oh, by the way, one of the first things I will tell the transition teams when they come in after the election is the importance of keeping a focus on this.
I appreciate that. I'm concerned that, as Secretary Moniz has outlined in a letter to OMB last December, which I'll introduce for the record, NNSA's out-year funding levels are, quote, still only half of the $2.8 billion needed to address infrastructure in the future, close quote. How do we ensure that this new administration recognizes this shortfall and requests appropriate funding from the Congress?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, we have laid out in our internal documents as well as reports that we've sent up to the Congress on our infrastructure needs, our recapitalization plans, our use of our ideas on using third-party financing. You know, I think we've built a good series of documents and a case, which will be clearly one of those things that we pass on to the transition teams as they come in.
Okay,
We also, you know, also one of the things we do, excuse me, sir, we also, as you know, every year put out the stockpile stewardship management plan, and we have our other plan on countering and preventing and responding to nuclear dangers across the world, which also lay out the infrastructure that's required to underpin those critical missions. And our naval reactors folks as well send forward similar reports.
Mr. McConnell, does NNSA have a plan for how to tackle this backlog of deferred maintenance, and how much will that plan cost us in the near term to make a significant dent in this problem?
Yes, sir, we do. You heard from the first panel that on a site-by-site basis, we construct something called a 10-year site plan, which is an integrated assessment of what each site needs to support its part of the mission. As you know, there are 8 sites that have to come together in an integrated whole to satisfy our mission. They go out 10 years, is about as far as the planning horizon starts to get too fuzzy. What we've done very recently is create a master asset plan, which is 5/8 of the way through development, that takes those individual site plans and then brings them up and connects them one level higher as an enterprise level to make sure that we can balance risk and investment needs not only to 10 years, but out to hopefully 25 years at an enterprise level, so that we can connect the infrastructure conditions to its risk posed to the mission, and then be able to make prioritized investments across the entire enterprise to optimize our success and to minimize our risk. Now, that gives us an integrated list of what to do when. The question of how long it will take gets back to the resources applied to it. So as you indicated and as the administrator indicated, we didn't get into this problem in a short amount of time. It will take us time to get out of it. But with the concerted resources that the Secretary and the Administrator have requested, and that thankfully were actually exceeded in the last 2 cycles of appropriations, we'll start to turn that curve and actually reduce deferred maintenance. It will take a long time, 2 decades, unless there's a very significant increase in investment.
What do you consider a very significant increase in investment that would get that clip down to a decade or less?
The history that we have that we can rely on is the 10 years where the Facilities and Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, FERP, was in place. FERP had, at its higher points, was between $200 and $300 million a year, and that had a noticeable effect.
Okay. With that, I'll recognize the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, General Klotz, I apologize for your having to spend your birthday this way. If you check, it may be a violation of the Geneva Conventions for this to happen. I couldn't help but notice in your testimony and in your statement the remarkable statement that if Congress comes through and provides $200 million this year to close down Bannister, that could save the government $500 million. Whoa. That's pretty amazing. We should do stuff like this all day long. But I would ask you, and it may be more appropriate for the record, and maybe Mr. McConnell can pitch in here. I think the public would be very interested in knowing what causes a $300 million delta like that. Like, is the government that inefficient? Or are these facilities so prehistoric, or government regulations so cumbersome that just by turning it over to the private sector, we can save this fantastic amount of money? That's significant. And it would also be important to see if we could do this elsewhere as well, because this is what's sometimes called low-hanging fruit. Like, why not pluck this from the branches while it's available?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
The unique situation of the Bannister Federal Complex just inside the Kansas City Beltway is it's very valuable from a redevelopment perspective. So when we can sell it to this private redeveloper, they can develop it purposefully for the next use, an industrial use. If we as the federal government have to deactivate and decommission the facility, we have to take it to standards that would be acceptable for any use, which is a cleaner, more intense level of remediation. And so that accounts for the significant price difference. That the government's constraints are a little bit more rigid than the private sector would have.
So we would have to make it, say, playgrounds safe for children so they could eat the dirt if they wanted to.
Yes.
And you're allowing it to be dirtier for an industrial use, so we save $300 million by letting it be more polluted.
Well, for making it, getting it to a point where it still meets standards, it will still meet all the standards for its purpose. But since the developer will have a specific purpose and the government doesn't have any specific purpose when it's getting ready to clean it, it's a different standard. If we were to repurpose it for our own use, we would clean it up to the same standard as this private developer, but that's if we were planning to reuse it for an industrial activity.
So government regulations require it to be retrofitted for any purpose, including the most stringent, the cleanest, and a private developer can just find a use for it that could be a landfill or something that, doesn't have to be
And they're not
that clean.
In our discussions with the developer, that their actual use for it has not come up. That's part of their business model.
Well, I think it's interesting for people to understand, what causes this incredible arbitrage, you could call it, between two types
And
of development.
that's the primary difference. There are probably
Yeah,
other
others,
differences
yeah.
also.
Anecdotally, at least, I've come to the conclusion that Naval Reactors has done a better job of maintaining its facilities than the others. I don't want to pass final judgment on that, but it's led me to the thought that with the traditional non-naval military rotation, 2 or 3 years in a job, move on, that makes it very tempting to leave maintenance problems to your successor. It's kind of built in the job because, as you put it, first the mission, the pointy end of the spear, then the personnel, and then if there's money left over, we maintain things. When Naval Reactors and the whole Rickover tradition was, you're there for the long haul. What is an 8-year tour now? It can be longer. And that gives you a much different perspective than a 2 or 3 years in, 2 or 3 years out sort of point of view. So I'm almost wondering if, in addition to the failure for Congress to appropriate money for maintenance and then some sort of sinking fund or amortization or depreciation, that we have a structural issue in our military where you're not going to get anything else but ignoring maintenance when you're only there for 2 or 3 years, because that makes it, it's almost like the old joke about the envelope in the drawer for your successor. Why don't we figure out a plan, at least for these ultra-sensitive facilities, that takes a longer-term perspective? General Klotz?
No, thank you very much for that comment. First, and you raise a very interesting point. First of all, I'm glad to hear you say that, in your opinion, Naval Reactors is doing well in this regard, because, as you know, we have some responsibility for Naval Reactors. The Director of Naval Reactors essentially wears 2 hats, one with the Navy and one with the Department of Energy, NNSA. And they do have their challenges. I've visited most of their major facilities, their laboratories. And there are some buildings there which, quite frankly, date back to the early days of the Cold War, back to the early Rickover era, and are in need of replacement. In particular, the spent fuel handling facility at Idaho, where they have a large pool where they bring spent naval reactor fuel from aircraft carriers and submarines, is starting to show some real signs of age and needs to be recapitalized. And with the support of Congress, we're on the track to do that. But you raise a good question. You know, in the military and among the political appointees, there is a turnover, and I think that speaks to the importance of making sure that, or what we've tried to do in NNSA and DOE over the last couple of years, is to make sure that we have clearly articulated, defined, and written down the roles, responsibilities, authorities, and accountability of the various activities that take place within the Department of Energy and within the NNSA, and then to put in place career senior executives who are experienced and experts in this particular field, so that as transitions take place, they know what they need to do, and they have the authorities and the game plan to actually carry those things out. So we've worked very, very hard to make sure that's in place. It may not be as satisfactory as an 8-year term for the head of naval reactors or the head of the Navy's Strategic Systems Program, who also has a longer fixed term. But it's how we've tried to address that particular issue.
If may I add one other aspect? One of the challenges that I've seen that has been faced is how to balance risk decisions between short-term programmatic needs and longer-term infrastructure risk. And one of the things that we've done recently in NNSA over the course of the last 2 or 3 years that's been very beneficial, both in terms of that decision and how to carry this forward, is created a system that more objectively analyzes and communicates the risk that infrastructure poses to the mission, so that decision makers like Administrator Klotz and the Secretary have a better understanding now than perhaps their predecessors had of what the risk trade-off actually is between the present and the future. The future was always a little fuzzy, and so the decisions tended to favor shorter-term risk at the expense of infrastructure. We now have a better way of explaining to the administrator what might happen if we either do or don't invest in infrastructure, and that allows for a better risk-informed decision, which produces a slightly different balance. And I think that's resulted in some hard decisions that have actually gone to increase investment in infrastructure.
To put this in a more understandable context for average citizens, we had a Treasury Secretary once who said that nobody in the history of the world has ever washed a rental car. Because if you don't think like an owner, if you don't care, you're not going to keep it clean. And anybody who's ever rented an apartment knows that if you don't keep it clean, you're going to lose your security deposit. And the landlord requires that security deposit because they want a sword of Damocles hanging over your head, so there's an incentive to turn it over clean. So I wonder in the promotion boards if we're paying adequate attention to the state of the facilities that were under a command. You know, when the commander goes up for a promotion, if they leave it in worse shape than they found it, if it's a dump, if they didn't push through the Pentagon bureaucracy for more money to keep it up, then maybe that should be a black mark in their career, because otherwise it's just too easy, in and out, 3 years, punch your ticket, move on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my time has expired.
Thank you, gentleman. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for 5 minutes.
First, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, thank you for this. It's a really important hearing, which we probably don't spend enough time on overall in Congress on these kinds of things. And it's really, it comes down to, and I'm really pleased that you brought up this issue of succession and the like. When I was over at the Department of Interior some decades ago now, there were what we knew as the Weebies. Now, I see Mr. McMillan knows what I'm talking about. It's the we be here when you're gone. And indeed, that's part of the discussion we're having here. I think that we're also responsible for making choices here. And in some respects, we have not required the information that we need to make the choices, in part because we really have two different operations here. We've got the Department of Energy, and then we've got the rest of the military with the nuclear enterprises on the other side. And the budgets are split, the committees are split, and the responsibility is also. But when taken in totality, the entire nuclear enterprise is really dependent upon what goes on here in NNSA. But you don't have the fancy missiles or the stealth bombers and other kinds of things that are part of our responsibility. And so I think it's important for us to be fully aware of this particular issue of not deferred maintenance, but the ability of these facilities to function for the purpose of national defense. In other words, in this case, the bombs themselves. And so we need more, I need more information, and I would suspect that perhaps my colleagues do too. And if you could provide it some of the information that apparently has been made available from the laboratories to NNSA, I would like to see at least a synopsis of that in the overall context, and really how each of these facilities meet the essential, and I want to emphasize that, the essential role of the totality of the nuclear security system.
Yes, sir, we'd be more than happy to provide that.
Now that's a long conversation, and it's frankly a lot of hard work on at least my part to understand how all this fits together, and I'll take the time to do that. Because one off, okay, we need a new pit facility. Fine, how does that fit into the overall picture of this whole maintenance? And I think that my colleague here was quite correct about the incentives in the system, and we all be gone, or we won't. So, you know, I think that fits it. I'm going to let it go at that and look forward to additional information.
Okay, thank you. If I could, sir, I'd like to publicly thank you for coming over to the Department of Energy and NNSA a few weeks ago. The visit of a member of Congress, as both Chairman Cooper and Congressman Rogers and Congressman Cooper know, goes through an organization like wildfire, and it is really a boost to the morale of the people who do this work and don't often get a lot of recognition and appreciation and care for what they do. So thank you, sir, for
the visit was
making that trip.
most informative, and and I'll come back at the
Yes, sir.
whenever there's another opportunity to learn along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Colorado for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having this hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. And I don't have any specific question, but I just want to say that I have been to Los Alamos, and I've seen some of the buildings right on the fault line. And I've been to Pantex, and I've seen some of the decrepit conditions there. And I agree with you, some of the deferred maintenance really needs to be addressed. And I want to be supportive, working in a responsible and effective way, efficient way to overcome these problems. So thanks for highlighting those and for being here today. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. McConnell, can you describe for us some of the various approaches you've employed to deal with some of these infrastructure challenges? And in particular, I'm thinking about line item construction, public-private partnerships, FERP-like programs, other approaches. Give us some idea about what's working and what's not working and what you'd like to do.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, as I described a second ago, we start with a more objective analytical basis for identifying on an asset-by-asset, individual facility basis what each facility's contribution or system's contribution to our mission is, combining that with an appreciation of the condition of that facility, how likely it is to fail. We have the ability to assess risk on a facility-by-facility basis that gives us a rationale for prioritization of what infrastructure investments are required. At a relatively high level, then, we make a decision about the totality of the infrastructure investment that that is appropriate at any given time. And then we get down to the nuts and bolts level of what is the specific system or facility or component that needs to be fixed, and decide whether it's a maintenance type activity or a replacement activity, or if it's a major construction activity. And that's how we then bin into the various tools that we have at hand. When it comes to major construction, when we have a large item that needs to be replaced, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, there's a very rigorous process, as I'm sure you're well aware. And one of the first steps in that is to do an analysis of alternatives. We figure out what all the ways we could satisfy the need are, and then do an analysis of each alternative to figure out which one makes the best sense and the best value for the government. We go into that, again, very objectively data-driven without the preconceived notions, and then identify which alternative works best. Two classic recent examples. In Amarillo, for the Pantex Administrative Support Complex, we went through that analysis and determined that the public-private partnership was the best option and the best value. We have, for the federal staff, a need for a new facility in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We went through the same process. That time, the answer that came back was normal, traditional line item capital construction. So we're driven by the data, we're driven by the results to pick the option that's best, and it's good to have all of those tools in our toolbox, because then we can get pretty specific on how to optimize our resources and to apply them to the best way.
Well, we've heard some examples today from Mr. Ricciardelli and Mr. Smith about successful public-private partnerships, and it's no secret I'm a big proponent of public-private partnerships, and y'all just had a real success, or you started a real success at Amarillo, taking on a portion of the deferred maintenance challenge at that Pantex complex with a public-private partnership. Where else, is there another challenge on deferred maintenance that comes to mind where you think a public-private partnership would be the right approach?
As I said, that in every time that we need to deal with acquiring a new capital asset, we look at all the aspects that are, and public-private partnership, third-party financing is always, unless there's some very unique situation, one of the alternatives that we.
But there hasn't been a project that you're facing where you've already done that analysis and you've decided if we had the money, a public-private partnership would be the solution?
Not.
There are other areas that we are currently working through. I think when we came up and briefed you or had a hearing on third-party financing and public-private partnerships, we mentioned Livermore, 2 facilities out there. There's two laboratories at Livermore, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory and Sandia Livermore. They both have projects which are designed not so much to deal with deferred maintenance, although it will, but they're designed to get at another objective that the Congress has and that the DOE and NSA has, and that is to create the opportunity for these labs, which are essentially engines of scientific technology and engineering innovation, to be able to work better with local industry and local universities and colleges in a collaborative space. So at Livermore, again, both labs are pursuing buildings which would allow the scientists from the particular from the national laboratories there to mix with people from the outside to advance innovations in high-performance computing, for example. So to us, that looks like a good candidate for public-private partnership. We have been working very, very closely between the headquarters and the 2 laboratories on this. They have been taking very, very careful notes from our experience in getting the Pantex deal closed. So we're still working the numbers to make sure that we can satisfy the requirements of the various OMB circulars, as well as the rules that have been put in place by the Congress and will be adjudicated by the Congressional Budget Office when it comes to scoring.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate what you've been doing, and I want to pledge to you that I'm going to do all I can to work with the ranking member to help convince our colleagues that we need to meet this challenge more aggressively because the risk to our nuclear enterprise is completely unacceptable at present. With that, I will yield to the ranking member. Any closing remarks? Has none. Gentleman from Colorado. With that, I thank you very much for your service to our country, and this hearing is adjourned.